Hello and good morning. My name is Joseph Kullengård. I'm the head of industry at Göteborg Film Festival, and it's amazing to have this turnout, even though it's still a bit early in the morning. Today, we're going to release the 11th Nostradamus report for the third consecutive year here at Marché de Film. And I just want to say a really quick thank you to Guillaume, Alexandra, Sten, Jules, and the other guys at the MDF. We also have an amazing panel following the presentation, so stick around for that. It will start about 10:45, 10:40. I also just briefly want to mention that Nostradamus is made possible with support from key partners BoostHBG, Kulturakademin, Nordisk Film TV Fond, as well as the Region Västra Götaland. Before letting Johanna on stage, I also want to mention that we soon will have a podcast episode coming out, the Industry Insight podcast, the EFM podcast. So stick around for that in a few weeks. Yeah, so without further ado, we have a lot of things to talk about. Please give a warm hand for Johanna Koljonen.
Okay, that's a crazy response. Thank you. How lovely to see you. Now we test, does the clicker work? The clicker works. If I forget to click, you can at any point yell click, and I will show you slides. Really, I also want to say thank you to the Marché for this opportunity to present this morning in the context of this Insights Day, when actually another report from the Crasinet project is going to be presented directly after this session. So if you really want to tank up on industry insights, you should stay until 12:30. My name is Johanna Koljonen. I'm an industry analyst and a near futurist. And I've written this report now, this is the 11th year in a row, and I look at sort of the closest edge of the big picture. We're at a time now in our industry when many things are happening at the same time as the landscape is finding its shape. And that means that looking just 3 years ahead or 5 years ahead, some things certainly are inevitable, but others can take really different paths depending on what we as an industry collectively decide to do. And that choice, that responsibility is what I'm going to be talking about today. And of course, I also want to thank our partners without whom none of this work would be possible. And again, this I think speaks in particular to the importance of public funding, also to this kind of structural work. The heart of this report, as always, has been our expert interviews, and I'm so excited to have many of our experts here in the room today. They offer their time very generously. And this year, our interviews cover everything from film funds to exhibition networks, audiovisual markets to researchers. And what I'm going to do now for about 40 minutes is to walk you through the whole report chapter by chapter. It's a lot, but it's also free to download, and I'll put the link up out at the end. And I'll also lift up some quotes from our interviewees in this talk, and I just would like to mention that for the slides, some of them have been shortened, so if you want to quote them in an article or something like that, please go to the report and check the full version of what they are saying. And the first chapter sets the stage, and it's titled, paradoxically, Hope. My biggest fear is that the creative industry will die on its ass while it's waiting for someone to realize its brilliance, says Professor Angela Chan. I still believe that cinema is our greatest art form, but right now I'd place money that in 5 years' time you can equate it with jazz and dance, so such legendary producer and executive Ted Hope. In the world around us, the night is darkening. The climate crisis is escalating catastrophically. There are wars right now, quite near to us, in fact. Food insecurity is increasing. Also in Europe, there are active famines. And the handling of all of these crises, of course, are complicated enormously by populist leaders, not just in autocracies, but also in democracies. And this baseline terrible state of things will continue for the rest of our lives. So our jobs as humans, as citizens, parents, as artists, is to dedicate our energies to mitigating harm, to saving what we can, and to transforming the world around what we cannot save. And in all of this, obviously, the state of our industry is kind of a lower stakes issue. But it is not without importance, even for these global questions. Because what stories we are told, by whom and how they are told, this really matters as a part of what futures our species can even imagine. And the sustainability of this art form and its varieties kind of really matters also to the world, and not just to our jobs. But that said, the state of the industry also is, of course, not great. In Variety the other day, I read, in the context of this festival, somebody wrote that the entertainment and media sector was described as this current hellscape. And I was reading this with a champagne flute in my hand. And I was like, okay, there are scales, levels in hell, of course. But even so, cut-downs, savings, austerity, layoffs, untenable business models, especially the sort of collapse of the pay-one window, the whole streaming market correction, pretty much everything about how we work is either fundamentally broken, temporarily broken, or at a breaking point. But weirdly, when you speak to people, that is not exactly what we feel. Paradoxically, this moment is kind of hopeful. Part of that has to do with the streamers pulling back and forcing this sort of boom year rat race that we have existed in to stop. Much of this industry, especially on the TV side, has existed in this groupthink where we all knew that the models were not, like the numbers weren't making any sense, but if somebody wants to fund my work, of course I will take the money. But then when the economic value of the work becomes disconnected from an actual audience, it also alienates us from the world and from reality, and that's not good, I think, for any of us. And the people who have lost their jobs will not take any comfort in this, which I fully understand, but many people are also in this industry feeling a kind of relief. When you hit rock bottom, at least your feet are connected to the earth. So now there's a strong market in Sundance, there's a strong market in Berlin. This feels based. Yes, we understand that this is a reaction also to the post-strike situation in the US, but when people are making decisions about the viability of a project, we now understand what that is based on. The fog has cleared. Okay. The reasons for hope right now are many, but they all go back to what Gayatri Dente of the MIA market says, that the broader audiences are very skilled in understanding quality. The last 20 years even of artistic flourishing on the small screen has trained in them a more sophisticated imagination. And on some level, that imagination is the only market that matters. So everything else I have to say today kind of boils down to this one slide. We as a sector have been and are very focused on making the work, the artistic process, getting things funded, getting things made. But if we want to exist and to not die on our asses or become relegated to niche but mostly elite audiences like contemporary dance, then we need to also do the work, which is earning the attention of the audiences, making our productions greener and more efficient, learning about communication styles and media platforms that we haven't been trained in. If you just want to keep making movies, good luck. If you want to work in an industry that can actually sustain you, this is the time for you to put some effort into creating that industry, because nobody else will do it for us. And your company, your organization, your broadcaster, your project is really needed for this change to happen rapidly and at scale. And to get there, I think we need to start here with theatrical overabundance, which is a nice and polite way of saying that we are releasing way too many movies in theaters right now. Thomas Eskilsson very wisely said in the report that this topic is actually incredibly uncomfortable for the industry and maybe even forbidden. And it has been that forbidden, taboo. So I'm really happy to see that it's addressed in many conferences, or some conferences at the Marché this year. In fact, this afternoon you can hear Thomas talk about this very topic. But the basics are not complicated. About 20 years ago, the admissions were doing incredibly well, and since then they have gone down. At the same time, the number of films released has more than doubled. And I can't do the long timelines for you right now, but even if we just look at the sort of last 5 years or so and try to set aside the pandemic a little, this is basically a mathematical problem. The number of screens, there's a lot of local variation in this, but let's simplify and say for the sake of arguments that in mature markets, on average, basically the same. Seats on a downward trajectory because recliners and tables take up more space. The cost of tickets is still going up faster than inflation in the midst of a cost of living crisis. And on this stage 2 days ago, I heard reported that 50% of polled people, I think it was in the Nordics, so well-off economies, have become more selective about which movies they will see in theaters specifically for economic reasons. The number of admissions is down. The proportion of screens that is taken up by wide releases is up. Films are longer. There are more than twice as many of them. And typically, when the local releases go up in number, the proportion of popular genres does not go up as much. So we make more films, but not necessarily those like easy to access, easy to love local titles. So there's fewer screenings with fewer seats, but there are more films that are economically relying on those audiences, while often not in any specific way trying to speak to those audiences. And even when you try to speak to your audience, which of course a distributor has to do whether or not the filmmaker has, the sheer amount of simultaneous premieres undermines their ability to cut through. And the ability of the film to stay in theaters long enough to build word of mouth. And this is pretty clear when you think about it. So why is this controversial? Because we genuinely believe that film is best in cinemas, which is true for most films and most people, but obviously also not true for all people or all films at all, in all situations. Thank God, because that's why we have the other windows, which we also economically depend on. When we say that we must save cinemas, we mean, in fact, different things, and this is important. We want to save theatrical exhibition as a sector. We want to revitalize the role of moviegoing in the contemporary landscape of cultural habits. We want to grow audiences for authored cinema and local cinema and world cinema. We want to build a sustainable audiovisual industry in which theatrical is very important. We want to maintain a pipeline of auteur filmmakers whose careers typically depend on these cinema-centric parts of the ecosystem like festivals and art house theaters. And these are not the same goal. They're all great, but they're not the same, so they will probably not have the same solution. And we have tried one thing, which we can now say with certainty didn't work because we tried it on the global level. We tried solving all of these problems by releasing more films in theaters, and that didn't work. And actually, it may have positively affected the last one, but we also had auteur filmmakers before, which raises the question of what is the appropriate number of releases. I can't tell you that, it depends. But it's worth doing the thought experiment for your own country, given the physical limitations of like linear time and available screens. What is sustainable? And if that's fewer films than today, what needs to change? Do you need more cinemas in cinema deserts? That might be part of the answer. Do you need fewer empty screenings? Do you need shorter runs, longer runs, more events? How could your local industry work together to actually achieve that? Your local production industry is almost certainly saying that the correct number of films is the current number of films, which is probably the historical highest. Think about that for a moment. That number is clearly not sustainable. So we can't accept that as a baseline. Either we need fewer film to be economically reliant on theatrical, or the whole ecosystem needs to change, or a bit of both. And I think it's nicer always to change a system through innovation than through bankruptcies. But we have to understand that that's the alternative here. The paradox of theatrical is that there are too many movies vying for attention and too few movies delivering on the engagement. But the market signals from the audiences are quite mixed. People want to go if they can afford it, if the film is relevant, if the experience is good. But a lot of the biggest titles out there right now are not connecting, and the smallest titles are drowning each other out. I have been, for the past decade, and still remain very positive about the theatrical business, or businesses, because arguably the commercial end and sort of everybody else are arguably in like different operating in different ways. And last year on this stage, I know I said that whether you're big or small, lazy exhibition is dead. That is still true, but I will now try to be more constructive and look at what kind of exhibition is actually alive. In this report, Fatima Jumel says, I asked an exhibitor in Vilnius, a small art house cinema, one screen with a small cafe, has the audience come back? And she said, Fatima, not the way they used to. Before they were coming to our cinema, Now they are coming to see a specific movie. And she continues, let's say you used to have 20 art house films doing 80 to 90% of the art house box office. Now it's fewer. This was always the tendency in the mainstream system, but now our audience also says, oh, I heard about Anatomy of a Fall, but that Romanian film, I can see it when it's on movie. And part of the answer why this is that economic situation of the audience, of course, which many of us forget because many of us have upper middle class lifestyles. But it's not just about the cost, the use of cinema is also shifting. And looking at what seems to be working, it gives a decent idea of where cinema going is right now. So, and I have given this a name, engagement theatrical. And I'm leaning on that word in different ways. An engagement theatrical title needs to be, like the film itself needs to be personally engaging, which usually means it needs to be good and relevant. If it's super relevant to the person, it might not even need to be that good, honestly, but it doesn't work the other way around. Even if it's a masterpiece, I will not see it if it doesn't have personal relevance to me. But I also need to know that it's personally relevant to me, so you need to reach me, and that's hard. But when you succeed, this is what, then I will engage with the title in some way, which is what gives it that its existence and its marketing, this organic reach that we are relying on so much, and word of mouth in advance. And that's then also afterwards, after the screening, if I'm already engaged, I will keep talking about it, which is also what we see in the data is key for theatrical success long term. And finally, going to the movies is increasingly an engagement, which means it's a commitment in the calendar. And typically it's a special night out or a personal treat. And most grown-ups, you know, we schedule those kinds of things in advance. But we, the industry, have a tendency to market ticket sales, the actual sale of the ticket, in a really short window just before the premiere, in part because there are so many premieres, but also just out of tradition. And I genuinely believe that we can get a much higher proportion of the audience to make that commitment of the ticket purchase several weeks earlier. Some people still walk in and buy a ticket, of course, then and there. And even so, it's still a special occasion for them, and we have to honor that special occasion. You want to make sure that the physical experience and also the social experience in the theater, not just with each other, also with the staff, is really good. Because otherwise you have turned their special evening into shit. And they will pick another thing to do the next time they go out. They'll still see the good relevant movie, but they will not see it in a theater. All of these kinds of engagement is what every film released in theaters would probably need to achieve. So now all of the producers and the distributors and exhibitors in the room are mentally pointing at each other and says, yeah, we're working very hard on this specific thing, but they are not doing their part. And you are all right. The main problem is, well, none of you are probably doing precisely the right things, I guess, but also you are not doing them together. Pointing fingers will not do it. You're going to have to sit down together title by title and figure out what it would take. How do we make this thing happen when we have that strong film? And I'll talk about the strong film, but I say one thing that I forgot before. Working together means sharing work, sharing knowledge, sharing data probably, and probably also sharing costs. So you might want the later windows to come in on the marketing of the theatrical release so that you're collectively thinking about what the life cycle of the title will be. But everything starts with strong movies, and here I will turn again to Gayatri Dente, continuing that thought from the beginning. The quality that the audiences are now used to has created great interest, as she says, in the best pieces of art, whether animation, documentaries, or feature fiction. Valuable, culturally grounded work. And the clearest example of this, of course, in the last 12 months is in the blockbuster space, where the audiences have rejected sloppily executed or like manipulative movies, or irrelevant movies, and author filmmakers like Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve have been embraced. And we can also look at the breakout success even of a title like Parasite and many other art house films since then that have performed not just at the Oscars, but also at the box office in that sort of like hit art house movie role that Fatima was talking about before. Just yesterday, someone from Neon was saying on stage that in the US, specialty cinema has recovered better than mainstream film, and for them specifically with their young audiences, they have their viewership has gone up after the pandemic. So I'm mentioning the distributors here because we have this romantic idea that if we just make the right film, the audiences will return. But when those art house films like Parasite break out, They don't do it just because the film is good, because many films are good. They do it because people across this industry, in some markets, not in all, have spent 10 years developing these new audiences and building cultural brands. You might be a festival, you might be a distributor, but you have some kind of relationship where when you say, here is that film that you will love, then you are believed. I actually think that we need to move away from this idea of the art house audience. And that word art house is so incredibly interesting. It's a very unnatural category. For me, it makes perfect sense because I'm 46 years old. If you take two films like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Zone of Interest, these two films have nothing in common except a very specific artistic vision. But to us, they are related because we exist in this room in a mental universe where the theatrical window has primacy, and most of us are also of an age where if you wanted to see this kind of film, you had to go to a special building, a special type of cinema. And the people who did that, or who still do, we call them the art house audience. And I think for the three youngest generations, for the millennials, for Gen Z, and for Gen Alpha, that has mostly never been true. To them, and increasingly to everyone, film is content in a sea of content, and the content is everywhere. They are happy to visit an art house theater for a relevant specific film, but that doesn't make them automatically the potential audience for every other film that is programmed in that theater. Now, that specific cinema can still build an audience relationship, a curatorial relationship with that moviegoer, but it's not like a bucket that you can just put the funnel of films into anymore. The fans will also, people will have fan relationships with talent, of course, like always, or even with a distributor these days. But it looks like what we're rapidly losing is that guaranteed audience that is potentially interested in every art house release. And this isn't just about kids. Remember that the millennials are now hitting their 40s, which makes me feel old. Yeah. We have always said in speeches in this industry that quality films can be loved by anyone and should be seen by everyone. And now for the first time, since probably like the 1940s or something, the best films really are within everyone's reach. If that total audience for quality cinema grows, theatrical admissions for these films are also likely to grow, which is, of course, very useful. But you can't just make the films, make the work. You have to do the work. So it's easier to believe that it's not going to work. It's easier to be a pessimist, because then you can just continue. I hear people say all the time that young people don't go to the cinema, and that is factually incorrect. They show up more than any other age group. And in the markets where that curatorial relationship building has succeeded, they are engaging in quality with great interest. So there is a choice to be made here. If we believe that film art does not speak to young audiences or that cinemas are dying, it automatically becomes true. But if we listen to the audiences when they say, no, no, we like those things, that when the films are relevant, when we're able to find them, when we can afford them, when we can enjoy them, if we believe this to be true, we can work with these audiences to grow the viewing of film art. So where do we begin? My notes don't match my slides at all. I will mention here that I have this wonderful full quote by Kersti Mo here. Let's see if did I press twice? No, that's right. About documentaries that have done really well in cinemas in Norway. And I have this discussion in the report about why they didn't do a sort of like a big international theatrical release, and what the trade-offs are of the different kinds of choices for different kinds of independent film. But unfortunately, I can't go into that now. Let's see what's on this next slide. There we are. Okay, so where do we begin to do the work? This whole chapter name I have blatantly sort of stolen as a reference to a program that is run by Europa Cinemas. I accidentally jumped up, just a moment. There we are. In Collaborate to Innovate, art house exhibitors test and evaluate new practices and share with each other what they learn. Not all the tests are successes, which is why it's a test. But when you try something and fail, you often learn even more, because it reveals to you that your assumptions, typically your assumptions about your audience, were not correct. Small cinemas don't actually have the resources to take the risk of developing and testing innovations on their own. So that's why this is so great. And when you think about it, that's also true for almost everyone in this industry. If you're not part of a multinational company, we can't afford to figure everything out on our own. We don't have the skills and we don't have the time. So that's kind of where we probably need to begin. We need to if we want to change across the whole ecosystem, we need to lower the risk of change and the cost of change. And the obvious place to do that is to scale up the innovations that have already been proven to work somewhere else. Someone else had a similar problem. We evaluate whether their solution might be relevant or a version of it is relevant for us, and see if we can implement it. We'll still need new skills probably, or new infrastructure or tools, but funding those is so much easier when the proof of concept already exists. Then there are additionally a lot of problems that haven't been solved anywhere, but there the innovation might actually be to think about those things together. To Ted Hope, anyone who is investing in a local market in any capacity actually has an interest, as we all know, to keep that market viable over time. And he says this: a forward-thinking investment strategy might be to shift your production funds into something more like 60% for production, 25% for marketing, and 15% for ecosystem building on a collective basis. As it starts to drive revenue, as you get proof of principle of what's working and you can double down on that, then I think the split can be flipped between the 15 and the 25. So less money will actually have to be spent on marketing, so says Ted Hope. Basically, if we collaborate, if we build everybody's ecosystem, you will not lose money, you will make money by investing in the success of others. Robert Franke of ZDF Studios is saying almost exactly the same thing in the context of the many new technologies that are entering, especially production now. He says, for me, the number one thing is that we all educate each other in order to stay relevant and competitive. Otherwise, we will be outcompeted by other industries, by people from the sidelines who use these technologies in a completely different way to create whatever it is people want to see. And of course, there are fields in our industry that used to be so marginal that they could never rely on a wide theatrical release. The obvious examples that pop to mind are impact documentaries and independent animation. And because they were in the situation then that we all are now, they have been forced for like a decade to work in different ways. And they've done that with great success. They've used new technologies, new workflows, new formats, found new sources of funding, built different relationships to their audiences. And these kinds of content are being screened in cinemas, are succeeding on television screens, and they are also having, or they also have available to them other kinds of careers and other kinds of funding models of being a professional. And I think that that's something where we can also start to look for inspiration. We're in competition with the world's biggest companies, and I think that has made us feel powerless and passive. And those unjust effects, yeah, like we can probably also only like address those on a regulatory level, but that doesn't mean that there isn't space for meaningful positive change or a meaningful sort of economic development of independent production. We're very traditional, more traditional than we need to be. Looking back to the 90s, there was a moment then too of technological change and market upheaval that was super different, but one thing was similar. The kind of independent film system that most of us work in today, and that is probably in some way ending now, it was created by people, passionate filmmakers who carved out viable spaces for themselves to create, and then the market followed. And we might be at a moment like that again, if we can imagine that the system could be better. And actually, we're working in this paradoxical tension inside this system with huge power imbalances, while we're also wanting to change it. Joanna Szymanska talks in the report about if somebody offers you a non-negotiable training, she's a lawyer, a non-negotiable contract, she's a lawyer by training, and she's like, oh, please, everything is negotiable. But of course, you will have a better position to negotiate if there are also other paths to market, and that's one of the reasons why we need to see what can we shift here. And the complexity is like we need to not be as reliant on the theatrical window, so we need to diversify our formats. But then we also need to grow the theatrical window for the films that we want to put in there. And that also, ironically, it doesn't lower the value of your commercial work in the market. Your commercial work will, like what has value in the market, will always have value in the market. But you will be a stronger negotiator if you also have other choices. And this might be my favorite quote from all of the interviews this year. Ted Hope says this: we need to create idiosyncratic, authored business the same way we can make authored works. In contemporary culture, if we think about a business visionary, it tends to be some kind of billionaire edgelord who is like building their wealth off like the earth's unconscionable use of the earth's resources and the labor of poor people. That's obviously not the kind of business visionary we're talking about here. In Cannes, I think it's an interesting, in Cannes is having this environment where we really have the reverence for the cinematic visionary. We need auteur business people, people who have this ability to see the ecosystem around the individual work, people who have the director's eye for situations and the producer's eye for opportunities. And you might recognize yourself from this in this room. Now, please take this as your call to action. The dream that you have of some other way of doing it, it's time for that to happen now. And I did the thing where I jumped up my notes again. So you can think now, take this moment to consider whether you are an auteur business person. Working together, of course, is also necessitated by the storm of new tools that is entering our daily work and all the phases of making a film. And importantly, this is not just about AI. AI is definitely part of this, but it's about how AI and virtual production are sort of hitting us and entering our workflows at the same time. I can't believe it. The legal environment is still really unclear. But the technology is less than 2 years out from fully AI-generated shots being suitable for theatrical features. And they are already used in professional ways in lower stakes video environments today. And I think, more importantly, the fully generated shot might not be the most important thing to focus on right now. Of course, the generative AI functionalities in the tools that we use will be just one way of many to solve technical challenges in the production of the final frame. And this very short timeline is very uncomfortable right now, because in 3 to 5 years, most filmmakers make 1 to 5 films. And that is a very small number of productions to create a completely new workflow on when you think about it. So even for your department heads, it will be really difficult to keep up. And as long as all of this is experimental and developing, putting together teams who have matching and complementary experience will also be really difficult. And let's say that we succeed and we're able to gradually introduce new ways of working. So maybe we change just like one aspect of every task in pre-production, production, post-production. That will have effects on probably literally every person who is working in your crew. So this also necessitates us, I think, to work together, because our industry, almost everyone is essentially some kind of freelancer, right? Technically, they might be employed for you like during the project, but you are not in a position to, for instance, force them to take training, right? Typically. So what we're talking about here is basically reskilling and retraining an entire workforce in every territory in new work procedures. And I think we're going to have to do this together and innovate together and learn together, because otherwise the efficiency losses, production by production, will be huge, because everybody will kind of be a little bit back to square one. So again, it's in our financial interest to collaborate, even for strong local players. In addition to learning the new tools, there's of course also the question of training entirely new people to have this deep experience in filmmaking. And that's discussed in the report at some length as well. I'm not going to go into it so much now, but let's just think, like, to summarize, that the ability to generate an image or an environment asset or a piece of music, like making something that looks right, is not the same skill as understanding how set design or music or a shot affects the narrative and the bodies and emotions of the viewers and the things and potentialities of what's happening on screen. So I think very soon we're going to think about the language of film more like we today think about the language of music. So most composers today work with fully digital tools, but when they go to the conservatory, we still train them in musical theory, we train them in physical instruments and in conducting the human orchestra, because it isn't just about making the beautiful sound, it's about understanding the underlying principles and the effects, as I said, on the human body. And there are also huge environmental impacts of AI that I won't have time to go into now, but I'm sure we're going to return to in the years to come. AI technology is having an even more dramatic impact on another part of our industry, which is the connected television. And please don't stop listening just now, just because I said connected television. I won't go into it in depth. You can read it more clearly in the report. But we have in all of our living rooms now a kind of computer attached to the internet where the television used to be, and it has a ton of content, and it does not deliver on the two central needs of that for that device to work. One is that the targeted advertising is not targeted correctly to us. We all know this, same on the internet. We're not getting relevant ads, and it's pissing us off. The second thing is we cannot navigate the content. We cannot find, and the statistics are very clear, we can't find the things that we want to watch. We often end up watching things that we don't even want to see. AI is, as I discussed in the reports, these problems have the same underlying cause, and AI is probably helping us to solve that right now. So what happens if content discovery and advertising targeting actually works? What if the content, you can find the relevant content all the time. What if you actually enjoy seeing the ads because they're solving you, they're making you feel good about yourself or solving problems that you really have? It's going to change the whole economic calculus of how much many advertising impressions or transformation or like sales in this case, because they're also going to be interactive, or how many ads are going to be needed for a piece of content to be financially viable. It's going to be a game changer for content aimed at niche audiences, and it will make it really difficult, probably even more difficult than now, to turn the TV off. And somewhat counterintuitively, I think one of the surprise winners will actually be a theatrical exhibition, because when the linear TV viewership fragmented and then we just lost it for some target audiences, getting the right trailer, and targeted ads on the internet don't work. Getting the right trailer in front of the right person has been a huge problem that now we may actually be able to solve. And I also suspect, this is just my vibe, that my relationship to the television might become similar, like a love-hate relationship, like the Gen Z people have with TikTok. It might make me want to actually turn it off and go out into the world. Okay. So finally, our industry is being squeezed by artifice. So on one side, we have this threat of synthetic media, which I haven't talked a lot about today, AI-generated content, like fully AI-generated or mostly AI-generated content. And it will compete for audience attention, I think, really soon, and really clumsily also at first. But what it's already definitely doing is that it's clogging up all of the media platforms and the systems that we rely on, including sort of the entire internet. Search is broken, social media increasingly is fully broken right now. And that's actually a huge threat to the business models of services that we as an industry also need, at least in the landscape as it currently stands. And then on the other side, we are squeezed by artificial demand. And by this I mean at least two different things. I think that this abundance like this of production funding that we have had is a kind of artificial demand. It dupes us, it confuses us into believing that having funding to make something also means that it has an audience. And that's not actually how our reality is, and in some ways for European film that it hasn't been for a long time. But there's also an artificial demand when people are manipulated in their watching of content to watch things that are not what their heart is sort of yearning for, but the thing that is most easily at hand, most immediately gratifying, or the least annoying, as the thing may be. And in response to all of this artificiality, humans have been very much on the mind of our interviewees this year. And being in Cannes also always makes it very obvious to me that the medium of filmmakers is film, but the medium of the film industry is people. People talking to people, as Hannah Reifgast says in the report. And centering the human, of course, really also must include and necessarily includes the humans who are working in this industry. We have made some strides in a lot of areas like access, inclusivity, workplace safety, mental health, and so on, but a lot of work really remains. And some new challenges are ahead, as jobs will clearly continue to disappear, and pretty much all of the job descriptions of the remaining jobs will transform. That's not something that people who are already burnt out are necessarily very open to or just cognitively ready for. Big companies, publicly traded companies, will approach these changes with a focus on profit, because that is what they have to do also in some countries legally. But most of us in the industry don't have to do this profit first. If anything, I think we need to organize to resist the sort of dehumanization of the workforce. And it's also discussed a little bit in the report that on every level right now, there is more collective action in the industry than possibly ever before, through unions for sure, but also collective action among people who are, relatively speaking, very powerful, like Hollywood studio producers who don't have healthcare and are fighting for that now. So this, in the end, is the paradox of hope. Like, everything in the world is pretty bleak, but as long as we don't give up hope, there's hope. Film and film storytelling will continue with or without the structures of this industry. But we in these rooms, we believe that these incredibly complex ways of telling stories that we have created for this incredibly collective art form that we have, we can make the most meaningful stories together, and our ways of doing this should not disappear. And I think Tabitha Jackson says it so beautifully, so she gets to end. One of the things cinema does so powerfully is to interrogate and investigate the interior landscape, what it is to be human. These works are not just luxuries, they are essential in counteracting this technological space. The stakes are high in not losing our humanity, and artists always find a way. I'm going to end here. Thank you very much. This is where you can find the report to download. Thank you. Yeah. The line break is in a strange place there, but obviously it's supposed to say Göteborg Film Festival /Nostradamus. All right, thank you very much, and I will now invite my panelists up onto the stage, and we'll continue over here. Thanks. All right, we have microphones, we can build water. With me here are Malika Rabahallah, who's Festival Director of Filmfest Hamburg. Welcome. Let's see if I can do this now. We were practicing before. Matthijs Wouter Knol, Director, European Film Academy. Welcome. And Lars Blomgren, Head of International MediaRes. Welcome. Thank you. I just dumped all of this at you with no preparation. So I wonder if you have a first reaction, top of mind, that you would like to share, or if you just need to breathe a little.
Yeah, it's a lot. But I mean, I love the idea that we are speaking about hope, because it's very important for all of us. So that's what I'm taking. And of course, at the end, people, we are a people business, and we have to take care of this, take care of us. So that's, for me, something very strong.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Matthijs?
I liked particularly the part where it said that I think in order to survive, we need to invest more and more into creating an ecosystem for each other, not just focus on our own survival.
Yeah.
So to sort of, I don't know, Ted Hope, I think, broke that down into like 15% and so on. I mean, I don't know where the numbers come from, but I think that's very essential to do that. At the same time, it makes me very skeptical, because I don't think we're not in a very altruistic industry, in my experience. So in that sense, I think that in order to achieve that, we can't just say, oh, it should be great if we would do that. So the skepsis and at the same time hope, because I think it is a way forward, and I think there is initiatives that do that as well. We need to find, incentives for people to do that, because I think industry only does that when it pays off to do that as well. And I think most of the people in the industry, especially when you are in a survival mode, don't have the luxury of thinking like, oh, how can I invest into the ecosystem for everybody else to survive? So
I realize, because there's so much background noise, we should probably have the microphones very close to our mouths. And what about you, Lars? First reactions?
Oh, I like that you connect the producer as a producer in the productions, but also taking responsibility for the bigger picture, not only potential audience, but also I see a lot right now with marketing, for instance, where American companies are way much more involved in marketing next to and in collaboration with the distribution.
So the producers get involved in the marketing side, yeah?
Yeah, and they're at a much earlier stage. And the other good thing at this is I see the the good and bad thing right now is really when we're being risk-averse, it's more difficult for young people to get into the business, and if you don't have a track record of succeeding. So that's a big challenge for them. But then on the other hand, they are so much better with connecting with their audience. And you can see that, especially on the theater, actually, you can see it how the young, they're selling out their shows because they connect to their audience in way before so they don't only perform, they drive people to. So I think that's important, the holistic big picture.
Because that's also like strange to just follow up on this. So that the filmmaker needs to have an audience relation, like to be responsible for the audience relationship. The producer needs to be responsible for the audience relationship. The distributor needs to be responsible for the audience relationship. And in theaters, or a theater or a platform kind of owns their audience relationship. And yeah, historically, none of these people have been talking together. So now already this is another moment of skepsis. Will we? Will we be able to talk to each other?
I think in the end, meaning probably from today onwards, we'll have to. I mean, again, I think there is ways. The hope for me is that the industry has always been able in the past decades, in the past century, to sort of overcome huge challenges that sounded like the end of the industry and so on and so on. So I do feel that there is historical resilience in the industry to overcome and to find new ways. I'm not very worried about the industry to die on its ass, as was said in the beginning. But it will die on its ass the way it is right now. I mean, that I think it is when it comes to, dying on its ass meaning if we just continue and think we're just going to make it through the way we do, obviously that won't work. Yeah. And we see this also in the last years. Compared to 5 years ago, there's a lot of people not around in the market anymore, or not only because they're retired.
They didn't retire, they tired. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. And so I think in order to survive, finding ways how to deal with things that are coming our way very fast is the only way. And I think there's a lot of people in the industry who are capable of doing that. And I think, as you said yourself, if you're not capable of doing that, you're in huge trouble. And I think you should reconsider what you're doing, or maybe
work closely with people who are passionate about doing those other things. That's, again, of course, nobody needs to do this fully alone. I realize you actually answered a question that I've been thinking about what's your personal hope crisis balance. Like, it feels like you have a little skepsis, but also a little hope. What about you guys? What about you, Malika?
Yeah, I have a lot of hope. Actually, after COVID, we saw that many things changed. The people could work at home, so something like a work-life balance could be installed. And then we spoke a bit more about mental health. We have to speak about mental health, which is very important in our business. We have to speak about the way we work in the production companies and on set, what's happening there. We have to take care of each other. And of course, for me, it's even more important to say that we see that diversity is coming. I live in Germany. I used to work at the funding institution in the north of Germany. And in the first years, I never read any story about migrant people in Germany. And my parents are from Algeria. I was born in France, and then I went to Germany, and I was just shocked. How can it be that nobody is telling stories about these people, and they are not telling their stories? And that's a big change too. So for me, it's a lot of hope, because some new voices are coming too.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Lars? Hope versus crisis? You used to work for like a really big company, and now you work for a somewhat smaller but significant company. Was that driven by a sort of hope-crisis balance, do you think?
I think it was just driven. I wanted to get back to producing that one. No,
Yeah.
but I think on a general note, I think a lot of people will fall off the boat. That's for sure. And I believe in the future. I really do, especially now with so we do a lot of TV, and on the TV side, all the shows are going much more mainstream. There's staying away. The streamers need to stay away from difficult subjects that can, like Saudi Arabia or whatever, like complicated places. So, but the way we're funded, especially in Europe, on feature films, we can still tell the most challenging stories in a good way. So I think that's hope. I think it's the toughest part, and the good and the bad. I think that we need, during this, like, the golden times when the streamers were exploding and all, a lot of young people had a chance because there was such a shortage of shows, and they were able to tell stories and get their first show done. I think that's going to be way much more difficult now, and I think we specifically need to support the young people. And also, if we want to build an audience, that is the most important thing, we need to support the children's section, because that's the future viewer. So, but I'm kind of optimistic. I feel sad for a lot of people that's gonna.
I should mention, it's also mentioned in the report, but we actually, within the Nostradamus project, we did a small report with a Nordic Children's Film Festival network earlier this year, and looking specifically at the production of children's film. And that was a little bit alarming, because these filmmakers really felt that in the last few years, even though the Nordics have a very strong tradition of making children's films and family films, that the funds were sort of kind of losing that focus on rebuilding the audiences. And then everybody agrees that when you get past sort of 12, then we have nothing, very little in Europe until the films about people in their early 20s. And that's also a bit of a challenge. You're nodding, Matthijs. You're actually working, of course, also in the context of the Film Academy with younger audiences. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think many of the things, I'm actually happy to listen to what you said today, because it also sort of was a bit of a relief to hear that a couple of things we've been trying to do at the European Film Academy, which is to build a community of people, to make people work together, to make people think on a European level, apart from everything they do on a national level, to make the connection between people sometimes much shorter, but also to say, well, we're not just celebrating the films that are, the talk of the day right now, but also seeing in a much broader perspective, and specifically trying to reach out to an audience that is so unused and has no emotional connection to anything that's related to cinema, which is, let's say, the teenage the teenage people of today, and to link them to the industry. So with the European Film Club that we set up last year, and it's growing, it's now active in 30 countries in Europe. That sounds like an awful lot, but it's not that we have like millions of teenagers yet, but we're hoping to get there. I think that connection of European Film Club to the actual industry and making films available
Can you just say briefly what is the European Film Club for people?
European Film Club is a digital platform making European films for younger audiences available to them. So it's basically a Netflix for young audiences between
like
12 and
but
19.
Is it art house / local? I mean,
it's films made by people in this room. So yeah, we would still call it art house. Can be all sorts of things. The interesting thing is, however, it's not set up by adults that say, hey, this is a film that you should see because you're 15. The programming is done by teenagers. So they say what kind of films they'd like to see. We bring them also to the market partly. They come up with topics that they're interested in, whether it is the world in which we live, mobbing, identity, who am I, why don't others accept me the way I am, environmental issues, and so on and so on. So many of these films circle around that. They see them, they can talk about it, they can review them, they recommend them. They can only see them in clubs, so not alone, but it's like a club they establish themselves. And it creates communities all over Europe in whichever language they prefer to have their film club. So they can also practice a foreign language if they'd like to. And it's it's growing pretty fast. It's based on a UK example that already exists for 12, 13 years into film. And we've translated that into European model. So it helps to sort of reach audiences that normally would not go to a cinema. And even if you say like this sort of event creating of like, I mean, they would not do that because cinemas don't feel like they're for them. And I'm saying that because we see in experience that, of course, we're talking to sales agents to say, like, hey, can you make your film available in 30 countries at the same time? We're talking about educational rights. It's for a limited amount of time, 2 years, 3 years. it's not very easy to convince people. I think that after a year or two, people start realizing it's an experiment worth trying for them with a couple of titles, especially because they don't have to be very new titles. It can also be films from 5 or 10 years old.
Yeah, and also these kids in these film clubs can be, or teenagers in these film clubs can be kind of become ambassadors for that art, those creatives as well, for the talent. So it sounds like a really good win-win. And also something that requires collaboration, again, across borders in unconventional ways.
I just wanted to add, because of the children, I mean, it's very important to go to school and to speak to children, to get them to see films, but it's very important for them to understand how films are made. So that's something we are doing at the film festival. We want to go to school, and we're doing workshop and everything, because we're going to have a big shortage of workers, I mean, film workers in Germany. So we have to reinvent ourselves and tell them that our jobs are very nice. They are very nice. I mean, even if they hear so many bad things about us, so we have to get to them, show them film, and tell them that could be a job for you.
I think so many people in this room who are about my age are here because of like extra materials on DVDs. You know? I think that has been it's such an important like entryway into understanding what jobs are even available in the industry. And then we, for all kinds of reasons, we didn't need those anymore. But now we need so much additional content for other platforms. So maybe the extra materials is back in this other form, and that can be a way of doing. So this is a way, okay, no, see, we're already innovating here. This is a way of doing ecosystem building. Because if you put some of your, Lars, some of your production budget, let's say, can we say a project that's public is the Astrid Lindgren project? Yes, that's public.
Brothers Lionheart.
Yes, so you're doing Brothers Lionheart with whom? Brag a little.
You're bragging. Thomas Winterberg.
With Thomas Winterberg. TV or film?
TV.
TV, excellent. So you're making the Brothers Lionheart, which is a wonderful, incredibly heartbreaking book, fantasy book. You can invest some money in making the behind-the-scenes footage as an ecosystem-building activity living up to that goal. Will you do that? Will you commit to that at this time?
I'll explore that route.
Thank you.
But I think the equally important, and I think there's a macro picture that we need to understand, and I think it's really ambitious, and it's been tried over the years, there's a traditional system with cinema owners, distribution people, and producers, and that when you start overstepping the boundaries, that always creates a lot of confusion, and it's failed a lot of times. So I think that in order to do it in a good way, to step into, start with marketing, whatever, you have to understand the other parts, and the distribution companies are struggling as well, and the cinema owners are struggling, so you have to, I think it's important for just to create a new audience or people working in the industry for the producers to be more aware of how the big picture. We always look from this as we've got one show and we're fighting for it, and we're like they have a slate of 20 projects over a year. Development time is way much longer than the trends. So when it's a challenging market. So I think that awareness is really important as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think some of this innovation is going to have to start kind of in the margins. Like there was a really interesting article in Screen just a few days ago, which was a case study with local distributors of Anatomy of a Fall, who just said like very specific, like what did they do with that film in their territory? And there were some surprising, like there were such huge differences, but it's also very thought-provoking. I think we should probably look at these case studies where there could be some examples of unusual collaborations, for instance, or co-distribution is something that I'm like super excited about now. People going in with, for instance, like collaborating on buying the rights for a certain territory or for two territories in different unusual ways. I did want to ask you if there are any examples of innovative collaborations anywhere in the sector that have inspired you.
Well, I think you mentioned, and one of the chapters of what you presented is the collaboration between cinemas, which Europa Cinemas is championing since a couple of years. European Film Academy, we work together with Europa Cinemas to make sure that the connection between cinemas and releasing films and paying attention and creating a window for European films at the end of the year, in our case related to European Film Awards, but the aim is much broader. I think that's a thing that I feel hopeful about and I see growing as well. And I think it's good to see that within cinemas, with the very little means that many cinemas have, there is an appetite, but also the sense of necessity to really work more together. I think that translates also to, I think, festivals, including Hamburg, that are sort of, I feel, also with you coming in at the festival and other people at other festivals as well, reshaping festivals in what they can be. I think the format of festivals as we know them not only need to be changed, but are currently changing in two different directions. So it makes me hopeful to see that, you know, when people run markets, when people run training programs, when people run festivals, say like, listen, we're going to do it in a different way. And we realize that audiences that we see around us are not being addressed, and they might 10 years ago never consider to go to a festival. We want to reach them. And I think these are things, even on a very small local level, 10 days per year, but they do transform and shape, I think, in many places in Europe at the moment, the way we are collaborating better, but also shaping the industry in the direction, at least. I'm not saying we're there. It's also not something that we can say, oh, we do this for 2 more years, we'll get there. No, it will probably get tougher. But I do feel that the people who are in the industry right now are waking up to that and doing their best for that.
What about you, Malika?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, as Matthijs is saying, it's a lot of work to get to other communities, because we did a survey and the people coming to my festival, they are more or less between 50 and 51 years old. They are called Ulrike or Peter, and they all studied as I did. So, you know, when I speak to my team and I say, okay, I not only want to speak to Ulrike and Peter, I want to speak to the other ones that don't live in the center of Hamburg. So we are starting new community building, going to other cinemas, and if there's no cinema in the place, we have to find another place, and we show films in other places. I used to do this in France because I come from Saint-Denis, and we did this with our mothers. Just we wanted our mother to see to hear their language on a big screen and to see their country on a big screen. And I tell you, it's something amazing when you have this audience. So we want to go out, not only in the center of Hamburg. We are trying to reach other communities, and it's a lot of work. And of course, you need resources for this, and that's what we are doing. That's what we are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. What about you? Do you have, Lars, some
you said I can say I don't know.
I can say I don't know. Yeah.
I've actually been away for I don't have any recent example that I would love, but I love the co-production model.
Yeah. And I actually thought of another example right now. One of the people I interview in the report is a young audience programmer at the Nordisk Film TV Lübeck, and she said that they have a very ambitious program of school screenings, and after the pandemic in particular, it was difficult to get the classes to come, and they looked very deeply into this, and they said that the teacher said, well, it's the cost of the public transport. If our schools are too far away from the cinema, we can afford to go to the cinema because of the very generous pricing, but we can't pay for the bus tickets to get the kids there. And she was like, oh, so they made a deal with the local transport company, which of course it has everything to gain from supporting this kind of a thing, so that the schools don't have to pay for the bus tickets when they go to this thing. And sometimes it's something else, and that's also an unusual collaboration, but it made a huge impact for them.
It's exactly what we are trying to do. If that's what I say in French, we say, si le prophète ne va pas à la montagne, then we have to go the other way. So
you have to bring the mountain
to the prophet.
To the prophet.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. So we are trying, if they can't come alone, so we will have to help them and put them in the bus. I mean, I know someone who is doing this very well in William Benedetto. He's in Marché, and he brings the people out of the different communities with buses. And it's just impressive when you see all these buses and all these kids coming out of the buses to go to the cinema. So yes, I would love to do this. We are trying, we are working on it.
Can I ask something? Because you mentioned at the beginning as well the problem of the overabundance of films being released. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I saw that, I was a bit like, well, this I hear already since 10 years. I mean, that's new, and we all see this, and we know this, and we see that's a problem. So I'm just wondering how that is going to change. I mean, it's either by people disappearing who are able to make films, so we just have a natural less number of films, but that I don't see happening very often. So I'm kind of curious how you see as well that we get rid of the overabundance of films being produced. I mean, that's also a question of funding, of course, and supporting people to make films, but is that the way?
From a Scandinavian perspective anyway, I think that's everything starts with the film institutes and then whatever strategy they have. And I think that, at least where I'm from, they've been struggling with having a consistent strategy. But I hear now that there's this thing about doing fewer, bigger shows again, which is like justifies paying for the ticket. And so I think that's maybe everything, all of Europe, from what I understand, is like based on soft money or government-funded money, whatever, and I think it needs to come from the top.
There is a Danish example that's mentioned in the report, which is that they have introduced a thing. If you get support for your film, you have to have a genuine, like your distribution plan cannot just be it's going to be in theaters. You have to have a very ambitious plan for what happens in the next windows that is actually like based on understanding the audience of your film. And that's something that I think everybody is looking at very carefully as one possibility. But there are also genuinely signals, because we've been used to the fact that our local theaters will, one way or the other, they will screen all the films that are made for theaters. And if that's not tenable, there are also signals in some market that the cinemas will essentially have to, like, somewhere, everywhere in the system, everybody will pump the brakes a little bit and go like, whoa, like we can't do this. But of course, the power dynamics are very strange, and like the relation of who actually decides what's in the cinema is a surprisingly complex question. But all of those people need to talk to each other, because again, like this is, we're cannibalizing our own audiences in some ways. Yeah. So I'm thinking a little bit about the time here. I think we have time for one more question. So Ted Hope suggested that stakeholders should invest in making the ecosystem more financially sustainable. So this is a really difficult question, of course, because the answer could be anything, but it's also in a way an easy question, because every part of the ecosystem is broken somehow. So do you have some suggestion of what you would like to see invested in to make a big change or a small change, or enable collaboration or efficiency or making something better?
Yes, I think I would love, I mean, I used to work at the funding, as I said, and the first question I ask the people is, who is your audience when they come with a film? And I have to say, I'm quite surprised to hear that so many people, they don't connect to their audience. So they don't ask themselves, who is going to see my films? So I would love much more investment in audience development. From the beginning of the film, you have to think about what you are telling us. And of course, my dream would be that we have more impact films, more film with impact for our audience, so that we tell them about the planet, what's happening. So we need a bit more of this, and I would love to have a bit more feel-good movies. I have to tell you, as a festival director, I see so many movies that are great, but I need some of them. When you come out of the cinema, you have to have a bit of hope for this world. Mm-hmm. That would be my bullet for the day.
And shorter, there was the audience.
And shorter.
Yeah, so
exactly.
feel-good movies are maybe, I think, is one of those genres that is maybe underrepresented in many local production markets, so that are popular.
Yes, at the funding institution, I told them we should do one call a year just for feel-good movies, so that the people learn to tell us feel-good movies. Really, you have to learn to tell us feel-good movies, because I was reading like 40 scripts from dystopia, and I was just fed up of dystopia. I just wanted to have nice thing to read.
So, but this is, it immediately becomes uncomfortable. Some people think, whoa, you're saying we need to make more populist art. Like, well, you don't have to make that film, but somebody should make that film. And we are willing to invest in it because it will grow audiences in theatrical, which is good for the ecosystem. Okay, Lars?
No, but I just want to, I'm sorry if this is an example from the TV world, but just to point out that nobody knows nothing. So there's a show called Baby Reindeer now on Netflix.
Yes, feel bad.
It's a horrible show that starts in black and then goes down, and it ends in total misery with an open ending even. So that's the highest rating show on the planet.
But what do people watch after that? Because I think it's some kind of literary potato peel society type film.
No,
that's
my point is just that we don't know. I mean, apparently that struck a nerve. Like, people, it was relevant to people. Something happened. I mean, I watched this the the girl with the needle or the
Yeah.
yesterday. It's such a horrible movie. It's beautiful, and I left the theater with a smile on my face. So it's like it's just you just have to crack that code. So what it is that makes it relevant? How can you tell a hard subject? Why is Come See the most seen Russian movie ever? It's like, I don't know. You just have to crack the code.
Yeah.
But some kind of silver lining, I agree.
Yes. Matthijs, what's your ecosystem investment dream?
I think there's two of them. I mean, first of all, it's something that in Europe has already been a hindrance for a long time, which is like getting rid of the fragmentation of the industry. So much more projects that make it easier for films to be seen almost at the same time all over Europe, so you can create much more of an audience that is not just like, cut off in all the countries in which you work, sometimes big countries, sometimes very small countries. So I think to invest in more pan-European experience of film will help. Focusing a little bit on Europe, but obviously this can also apply to other parts of the world. But I think in Europe this is really still a challenge that we need to overcome at some point. I mean, why wouldn't we be able to overcome at some point? And the other thing is, we're all here in the room, but I think to solve the problem and to make this industry work, we need to invest not only in our own ecosystem and in something that we can all benefit from, but also for the generation after us to benefit from. So it's not only like, let's make it work for us in the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years that we work, but let's also create something that in 10 years from now, people who are now in their teenage years will find an industry that actually works better than the one that we are working in. And I think that is something to also think about and invest in on all the levels possible.
What about you, Lars? You're not used to thinking about these questions. None of us are.
No, the thing is, I've been stepping between. I mean, I'm an old man, so first I'm in the age where I'm happy to have a job. Okay, so, but it's also I've been stepping from having a macro perspective and having this new more the producer perspective, and I truly believe that we have to understand the big picture in order to move this forward in collaboration with the cinema owners. And there's so many big issues right now, how to drive people to the cinemas, why they actually go and what drives them, and that's, we just have to get that understanding and also respect that we need even the young talent to respect that they have, it's not their money, so they're spending someone else's money and they have to,
the budget of the
budget of the show, so it's not for them, it can't be, you're spending someone else's money, you can't spend it on yourself, spend it on the audience. I think that's my, I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. So, but then I was thinking, how do we do that? What would be the practical way? So I think for those conversations about how to make things like individual titles or the theatrical ecosystem work better, I think maybe creating spaces where we can share case studies very earnestly, which probably means confidential spaces within the local territory, for instance, to have like probably very painful conversations and also very joyful conversations of like what worked or like, and if it didn't work, why, what have we learned? And you don't have to like share every humiliating detail about your project, but you can still go out in public or to your, in a closed room, but in a big industry room, which is closed, and say what we learned about our assumptions about the audience is this thing. So next time we're going to try some like this other version. So that we just need to talk to each other more, which is weird because the only thing we do in this industry is talk to each other.
On panel.
But it's some kind of different conversation that's needed. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think we talk a lot and we do too little. So I think, I mean, obviously talking, yes, and we go to places to talk to each other, and we're all here to be able to, connect on a personal level. That will not change, hopefully. That's also the fun of the business, as far as I'm concerned. But in a way, one point also from the Nostradamus report, I mean, the crash that we sort of see or feel coming, or that is in many cases already happening, I think it's a bit of a relief as well. To be honest, when I read that, I was a bit like, oh, I recognize that feeling, that for the whole thing to just crash, to force us to say, okay, so how are we going to go further now? I think is something that will help the industry in a way. And obviously the crash would not be the complete wipeout of the things as we know it, but it should be, I think, I think many of us needs to be forced to say, okay, it really doesn't work anymore. How are we going to continue? And there we can talk about, but we have the urge to do something and not just to say like, well, yeah, let's make it work the way I'm used to work it, because none of us are very keen on saying, I'm going to give up the way I work.
Mm-hmm. In the report, Joanna Szymanska says that the change that she's really seeing in co-productions in Europe is that people prefer working with people that they like and respect over the person who gives them the most money. Because especially after the pandemic, it's like life's too short. We can't, you don't want to waste 3 years of your time with people you hate, or 5 years of your time. And I think there's something in that. So I just thought of a practical thing that I'm not going to test on you. I'm going to give the audience homework and I'm going to test it on you. So that I haven't prepared anyone on this, and I just thought of this, so I might not be able to verbalize it. But what if, like when you've been listening, there's probably like one person that you would need to talk with to start the process of like getting together some other people so you could have a real person, to have real conversation about some problem. You have some problem that you want to solve. There's some constellation of people that would need to gather, but that would never work because first you have to do this thing, and first you have to do this thing, and first you have to do this thing. And then think about what's the first email in that chain. And your homework will be, before you leave this room, email that person and say, hey, when I come home from Cannes, we need to book a meeting. One sentence, that's it. You don't have time for more because you're going to go to another thing. Can you think of one person that you would need to talk to start some kind of chain of events? You don't have to tell us who they are, but you can tell us something about what you're thinking about when I'm saying this.
Yeah, for me it would be Kersti Mo, who's here in the room, I think, and Tina Fischer, who has just left, because they're part of the funding system.
Yeah, CEOs of funding.
Incoming head of the Danish Film Fund and the Norwegian Film Fund, both very active in EFAT, and I think what you said, the top-down approach, I'm not saying that EFAT has to solve the issues of the problem, of the industry, but I think together with the funding institution to sort of see how we can get to things, I mean, that would be, I think it's a very key part of the industry at the moment. So for me, they would be people I would say, hey, could we sit together and talk about that?
Okay, he's not going to be able to send the email from the stage, but you've heard it now. What about you, Lars? Who do you want to get in touch with?
I honestly don't know, but I want to. It's a good idea. But I want to comment on what you said, because I think you said that the creative people will not necessarily take the best financial choice. They will work with people they like. That goes the other way as well. So distribution companies, streamers, broadcasters, institute, they want to work with creative people that they like. And that, I think that's really important to remember as well. Talk about macro.
Yeah, and actually also we've talked about before how still this toxicity problem in the industry. I think maybe we're finally getting rid of the assholes. I'm sorry. Yeah. What about you, Malika? Final words. Who would you like to get in touch with?
I think I wrote this email already.
Great.
So
what can you tell us about the email?
No, I mean, I wrote to other festivals to say hello, I'm the new one, and I would love to speak to you. What is your experience, and how can we get better festival worlds? So I think I did it already.
Yeah. We write in the report that the mindset shift that we need to do, most of us in most situations are not competitors. Most of us have only like 5 competitors or 7 competitors in the world, and they're all multinational media companies. And the rest of us are essentially colleagues. We're building the same audience. Yeah. All right. Is that where we should end? You're all nodding? Then that's where we should end. Please give our panelists a huge round of applause. Sorry, I have to say one more thing. I just want to remind you that at 5:30, the Crécinet report is going to be released here, and that's also going to be super exciting insight, so please stick around for that.